Hey everyone, welcome to Textiles Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Cameron Taylor Brown, and I'm going to be your host today because Kathy is not able to be with us. Today's episode of Textiles Tea is sponsored by Myrna Lindstrom. We welcome your questions and we'll try and address as many as we can at the end of the program. Please submit your questions using the Q&A button and not the chat button. Let's see. All righty, let me just, okay. So today we are having tea with Anie Toole. So are you going to be rotating through? Okay, today we're having tea with Anie Toole. And weaving and natural dye are at the core of Anie Toole's transdisciplinary studio practice that extends into printmaking, clay, and sound explorations. Weaving and its systems of notations model translation, translanguaging, and writing. Through materials, she manipulates language and its forms. Failing to model the vibrations and the space of simultaneous translations, her studio research speculates dual spaces that accommodate two languages at once. Currently based in Quebec City, she holds an MFA from Memorial University of Newfoundland, a fine craft diploma in constructed textiles from MMAQ. In English, that would be the House of Craft of Quebec, and a Bachelor of Science with honors in mathematics from the University of Ottawa. Let's see. Distinctions include the Helen Frances Greger Award from Craft Ontario, Windgate Artist Fellowship Vermont Studio Center, Design Toronto Founders Award, and the Emerging Artist Fine Craft Award for the region of Quebec City. Toole exhibits across North America and was a Convergence intern in 2018. So welcome, Anie, to Textiles Tea.
Hi, Cameron. I'm really
Hi.
happy to have tea today.
Absolutely. So the question, of course, before we launch into the textiles is, what's your favorite tea?
My favorite tea that I bring to the studio in a trusted thermos every day is Indian street chai from the Chai Brewing Company in Ontario.
That sounds delicious.
Kohat chai. It's absolutely delicious and it warms me up when I take a break.
Right. And where you live, it gets pretty cold. So that's a good thing,
Yes.
right? Yes, there you go. Okay. So the big question to get started is, how did you get started in fiber? That's always an interesting story.
And I think my story is also like so many people's stories. I had a grandma who was a seamstress. She would sew curtains for shops, and she babysat me when I was a child. So to keep me busy, I did all sorts of textile craft. And later on, when I went to university, I hesitated and I went into mathematics and French because I wasn't sure, didn't want to close any doors, but kept on like fixing pants and sewing for friends. And after university, I just began taking a lot of textile workshops. And there were really like two key moments. So I stopped going to university after a guidance counselor told me to go work with my hands, that's what I really wanted to do, and to come back to university when I felt it was time. And I visited I was living in Montreal by then. So I visited the Center for Contemporary Textiles, which Louise Bérubé had founded. And it was probably Louise giving me the visit, because I remember just being there and saying I graduated mathematics, really enjoyed fiber arts. And she was like, you're completely at your place. This is like 50-50. And I was like, finally, it's amazing. Yeah. And then my timing wasn't right. We moved away. And again, we moved to Quebec City, and I was like, we're moving to a new city. I know no one. So I signed up for an evening pottery class at the Maison des Métiers d'Art de Québec, the House of Craft, which has constructed textile, sculpture, and ceramics. And then, so I was in the building on open house night, and I just naturally migrated to the textile floor. And then I was a student for a day, and then I sent in my application. And I actually went in for, I was doing knitting and developing patterns and wanted to learn machine knitting. And it wasn't until second year weaving where I really, I mean, it just turned around. And one day I was like, it was over. It was going to be weaving forever. So I
This
really
is it.
just like,
Yeah.
yeah, the complex weaving class.
Mhm.
It was the tube in a tube. When I got that, it was nothing else.
I find it interesting because there's so often there's this interaction between mathematics and weaving, and people enter weaving through so many different doors, right? So yeah.
And it's really like a playground because you can play around with like number structures, but then you actually have like textile and color and so much going on. So it's like it's applied mathematics.
Right.
Very fun.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. So let's go on to looking at some images. Okay, so these two pieces, I think are really a nice starting point for your work. A lot of your work has negative space, which creates really interesting textures. So would you talk about this?
Yeah, there too. The work on the left, I was playing with, I wanted to see how big I could go with waffles. So I was working with a jacquard loom, and that's not the biggest one. At one point, I was trying with super bulky yarn. And this is just trying to take advantage of the jacquard loom, because when you do threading for waffle weave, it's point threading, but then there's like an infinite number of shafts or per heddles. So that was really, and like once you take it off the loom, it really like pops up. It's very, very satisfying to have very deep waffles. The
Absolutely.
other work I was trying to do, what I really wanted to understand was layered weaves. And so it's like a honeycomb, and it goes from like 2 layers to 3 layers to 4 layers to 6 layers back down to 3 to 4. And that was really like an exercise in notation and just learning that there was not necessarily like one way, one consensus to write it. And it really made me interesting in like how to write it efficiently, how to find the smallest way to write it. And then I was weaving with 6 white linen shuttles, which was like a numbered challenge in itself. And the pieces dyed, it's dipped in turmeric. So also just using like cellulosic fibers and dyes that rely on pollination.
Okay, so the gray is what it's photographed on, and the piece itself is white and yellow, right?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And it's also, it looks like it's flipped up a little bit.
It's like it held up. I think just to be able to hold it up, I put some like the transparent acetate, and it's like rolled, so it just like makes it stand, and then
it's really
cascade
sculptural
down.
It's fascinating. Great, thank you. So would you talk about intuition versus calculation in your weaving a little bit more? Because I definitely see that.
Yeah, there's really 2 parts to that. One of them is I could just sample. I could sample colors, I could sample weaving forever, and then just be satisfied with that. And there's also, I mean, weaving it has to be calculated, the warp, the quantities. There's a lot of math. There's always limits. I mean, your loom is only a certain width, your beams can only accommodate a certain amount of cloth. Your hands can only extend so long for the shuttle. There's always like a parameter to try to get around in some way. But then it's fun to sort of decide and then leave things just to happen once I'm actually weaving at the loom. So I'll plan a lot of things ahead, but some things I will like absolutely leave open. And I might be doing a dye project and it'll take me a month to dye, but I'll leave the threading open, or I'll leave something to sort of how I'm feeling at that moment. And then I can like interfere or intervene afterwards. And there's also the part, and that's just how I work with sampling and overthinking. And so when I need to make a decision, I put away all my books, all my notes, and I'm like, I know like, how do I feel this? How do I feel it for whatever I'm trying to convey in the project? Like, how does this feel emotionally? What color do I want to go to, or what fiber? And then like not think of it in such a either like research scholarly way, but sort of just have the intuition from all of the knowledge that I've built, because if I'm interested in something, I'm interested in the history of it, but then like in the science of it and in all the ways. And it's just a way to keep myself and just see also how I feel about it.
I'm sensing a kindred spirit here as I reach across.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have to have tea again.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'll try yours. So sounds great. So thank you. So one of the things that I noticed when looking at your work is you really weave with the whole continuum of weaving equipment, all the way from a jacquard mechanism to the Inco loom. And so how do you decide which loom to use?
I mean, some of these decisions are really practical. I use the jacquard looms either on residencies, or I can rent them from the school, from the Maison des Métiers d'Art, and then the Inco loom is portable. But then there's also like, depending on the project, a lot of work has like some historical roots. I'm very interested in like thinking of what my ancestors would have been doing. So that might be why I pull a loom. I can be curious about a certain effect. Like there's such a different effect from switching looms, but I mean, I like every loom. And I actually found out about the Inco looms because when I was an intern at HGA, I assisted a class of like intermediate Inco loom weaving, and then I purchased the loom afterwards from Daryl Lancaster. And then I remember weaving in my room with my roommate, and we're still trying to figure it out. And then I have the loom from then. It fit in my suitcase, which was pretty amazing. So there's lots of memories with all the looms.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite
Loom?
Yeah.
I can't pick a loom. I do like, I have an 8-shaft compact Leclerc here, which is a pretty good loom because I can fold it. It's a nice size. And then, yeah, I have a Fisher Price loom from my childhood. That's not the one from my childhood, but I mean, I think I'm just attached to that because it was the first loom I had, and I remember using it as a child. So, but yeah, I couldn't pick one loom. I don't think anybody here can, though.
Yeah, I think that many of us have more than one loom and are always there's always room for another. I rarely say no when one crosses my path, which great, thank you. So this is kind of fun. You had a residency that revolved around working on a paddleboard. So why did you want that type of experience?
Well, I mean, that happened during the pandemic when we couldn't go anywhere and we couldn't travel, couldn't leave the country. And it was also, it ended up raining, but it was also just to see how much it's just like setting up the framework, and all the good that happens in a residency can occur anyhow. So it was just 3 hours on my paddleboard, but surprisingly, I made myself stop and quiet and then just like be attentive. And I was very attentive to my surroundings and ended up like doing work differently. And I was quite surprised how generative it was. I've been like dreaming of finding a way to do it on cross-country skis, which is my like winter sport, but I'm not sure how that would work without freezing my fingers. But
so what type of work were you doing on the paddleboard? Were you weaving on the paddleboard, or did I miss
actually
something?
worked with clay.
With
I brought
clay.
a barrel of clay, and then I was shaping forms, but I work a lot in clay, and it's so counterintuitive to weaving, which is like gridded, and then the clay is so malleable and soft. But often when I'm stuck on a project, say weaving, I'll actually try to work it out in clay, either if it's for like install or 3D, or I'm not really sure where to go next with that project. I'll work through it in like a whole bunch. I really have to like trick myself. So either like I'll work small with tiny things, or I'll draw it big, or I need to switch mediums to sort of like solve it when I'm stuck. So clay is a really good way to think about weaving, even though it's like very far.
Okay, so we're jumping ahead a little bit, but it seems like you do like to cross languages, cross mediums, and we'll touch the trans language a little bit later, but I'm seeing some connectivity here, which is kind of fun. So
yeah, and I think that is why I do it, because I'm so used to I'm so used to thinking in at least two ways at once that I do it in my practice also.
okay, that's what feels comfortable to you or normal, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, great, thanks. So switching into something else, your work, Play Coveralls, was in the Convergence Fashion Show in Knoxville this past summer. It was a big hit. And not only because the textiles were wonderful, but because the modeling it was just so incredibly joyful. So the whole experience was fabulous, as far as I was concerned in the audience. So would you talk about like your experience with this piece?
Yeah, oh, well, first I'll say my experience seeing the videos of Convergence, it's amazing. I mean, sometimes people won't necessarily like play or move around or think you can do sport in a hand-woven garment, but I mean, the fluidity and the agility was just absolutely amazing, which is like more than I ever imagined for these coveralls. So this piece, I found the pattern. There's the book from called Keep Me Warm One Night, which is a big book on blankets, which is a gorgeous book from Dorothy K. Burnham. And just flipping through that book, which I love, there's this blanket, and it's Mary Ann Toole, the name of the weaver who lived in New Brunswick. I don't know of her, but we share the same last name.
That's pretty wonderful.
And so, yeah, so then I just imagine sort of like what would happen if we conversed or she had passed on her pattern and I wove this blanket, and then I wanted the blanket. I love blanket coats, all types of blanket coats, but then I wanted to sort of take it, see what it looks like if you're making it also into a garment like coat style for a child. So that's when I made the placer coveralls. That's like on the reverse of the fabric, and I made like a jacket for a woman, and then I individually overdyed all the pieces in indigo because they're all the merino wool is all naturally dyed.
Mm-hmm. It's really wonderful. So did you have a hard time cutting it up? Because that's always a question.
I took my time and I serged every single piece before sewing it together. Okay. Yeah. Sure. It wasn't like a fast sew like normal sews, but it sewed together extremely well. And I don't remember having to like unstitch things because that would have been pretty hard. Yeah. Yeah. And I had just about enough fabric, like not much extra, I remember.
Do you save all your scraps?
I do save my scraps. And I remember submitting it because when I was an intern with Convergence, we got to see and handle all the garments. So we got to feel the weight of every single garment and check the seams and everything. And that was very exciting. And also like very much, you know, it told me that I did want to submit a child's garment if like for the next fashion show and have a child walk on stage. So yeah,
great. Thank you. So in the upcoming piece, I don't know what I know, you combine words with a variety of fiber techniques, including weaving, embroidery, and natural dyeing, all working together. So in your mind, do these techniques collectively define the meaning of the work, or do they lend themselves slowly to the visual outcome?
It's a bit of both. Definitely, I love hand fiber, like hand embellishments, and I do like my favorite quilts are the ones that are a bit quirky, that go into dimension. I like the mistakes, or like I love something where you're not sure if the person ran out of fabric, say for quilts, and they had to put in something else. Like that's the unexpected piece that makes your eye, like that really creates the visual interest. But so for this piece, and sometimes like color has a lot of signification, like, or there's always a reason why I pick a different natural dye. And sometimes it's just like, I remember its smell and I enjoy it, or I've done historical weaving on it, or I remember just like an anecdote reading through a book. So they are significant in that sense. And I try not to have like too much delay between when I dye it and use it, because sometimes like my whole mood changes. This particular piece, and it was sort of, I wanted text to look like text, and I knew it was going to be a 3-panel blanket. So I just responded to like a writing prompt, which was, I don't know what I do know, and put a timer for 5 minutes and just spilled my heart. So it's a very personal text, and I thought you couldn't read it when I did the sample, and I could see it stretched out on the loom, and I tend to take a photo. And because I mean, if I saw it on the loom, I did like a tiny sample, and I was like, oh, you can't read it. It'll be fine. It'll look like text. And then once I took it off, I was like, wow, you can read everything. And I was like, I guess that's what it had to be. And it sort of just made me like, maybe I'll work more on my writing that I include into pieces. So I thought that was like an interesting way of pushing it on myself. But so I wrote the text in English, and then I translated it in French, and then I retranslated in English. So there's a piece that sort of faces the other way. So you can like fold it back and check the back translation. So it's really working like a pamphlet. And like the red, it becomes like a text, but say the red pieces, every bit was different. I was reading, I think when I did this, my youngest child was 6, and we were reading, he goes to Francophone school. So we were reading, and he was reading the letters on the page, and there were letters he wasn't pronouncing because they weren't on the page. And in French, you have to add them, and they're called liaisons. And there's all these types of rules, which obviously no one would know about. And so I just took like an overlay paper, and I was drawing the liaisons, just thinking loosely about it. I mean, so I'm just reading in bed with my child, and I'm thinking about language, weaving, probably. And then I tried it in English, and I was like, oh no, that doesn't exist there. So then all the little pulled threads, what they represent is where there is a liaison to make.
You're talking about the red ones?
Yeah, so that is everywhere that there's a letter that would have to be added that you wouldn't know about if you were reading it, but if you were speaking it, it would have to be included. The stitching, I did it part with punch needle and part with rug hooking, but that just underlines the difference between the original text and the back translated text, saying that exactly, there's never a one-to-one correspondence. And that's also like, weaving is very much like mathematics, where it's sort of like a perfect language, where actual language doesn't fit that way. And it's really nice to just to play around with that. Right.
It's just that this is a piece that it's more complex and interesting the longer that I look at it. So, you know, structurally as well as content.
And it's nice and warm and functional. Like I've tried it, like when I blocked it, I tried it on my bed, and I was like, it's a really nice blanket. It would be a good Canadian winter blanket for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember you saying that in terms of the fibers that you used or the colors, that most of the color is the natural color of the fiber, and there's not that much that's actually dyed in this piece. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's wool, but I used just also to have the effect, the base, it's like a basket weave, and I was using natural like vanilla and bleached cottons from Brassard, which is the local supplier in Quebec. And then for the wools, there's white, there's like off-white, there's natural, and there's natural gray. And they're from 2 mills. They're from Briggs Little, which is spins in New Brunswick, and they're from McCausland, which is in PEI. And I was trying to really to make like a local, as local as I can make blanket. Now I know the dyes, they're not, because there's Brazil wood and but just for the yarn itself, and that one I kept very natural. But sometimes it's like all color, and sometimes it's much more the fiber itself.
Yeah, it's really a rich piece with lots of interesting things to take a peek at. So thank you so much. So now moving to a second piece that uses language. Last year, totally serendipitously, I was selected to serve as a juror for HGA's 2022-23 Small Expressions, which is an annual, for those of you who don't know, is an annual juried traveling exhibition sponsored by HGA that showcases small-scale works of excellence, of course, created using fiber techniques in any media. And all of the submissions were anonymous, so I had no clue until I saw this piece in your portfolio, like who made it. But anonymously, I selected your submission, which is titled Frappology, which is shown here. And I wanted to ask you, do you consider Frappology to be an example of translanguaging? And if so, could you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely, because translanguaging, the way it's used in education right now is, it can be to allow, say, students or language learners to use both their languages at once. What I find interesting, and I mean, I work a lot on the computer, is I speak English, French, and Spanish, and then I can only select one keyboard, or I can only select one like corrector. So I'm always looking for a different one. And also, say I receive an email, say I'm communicating with someone, it's never the language I need. And an exercise I've been trying to do with myself, and because I noticed like some things I learned them in English and some things I learned them in French. And sometimes I read on it in English, or it happened in English. And then other times, and my own accent will like change whether I'm speaking about something I lived in English or French. So it's very, very fluid. So I was like, I tried to exercise myself to see if there was nothing going on, like what language would I choose to say this if there was absolutely, like, I wasn't communicating to someone. So for these dice, and I find that it might just be completely random. So for these dice, I checked all the keys and I associated for Spanish, like uppercase and lowercase, each key for English, French, and Spanish. And then I wove them, and they're wood inside. I tested them with foam also, which was a lot easier to sew. But then when you drop them and it's the wood, they make a much better sound. And I cared a lot for that. And there was a sound piece. The first time I showed these, there was a sound piece. So frappology would mean, in French, is the analysis of someone by the way they type. And so I just answered the same question. I don't remember what the question was, but in French and English and Spanish. And it was just the sound of my fingers typing, where like I might be, hitting the keys harder or more decisive, or more, I was definitely hitting the delete key a lot more in Spanish, because I use it a lot less. But it was sort of, can you hear the difference if I'm speaking in another language? Like what happens to all the rest of it that's not actually the words? So yeah, that piece really represents it. And I've been wanting to revisit these dice, but with color and maybe with weird characters and like offsetting them. Yeah, I think it's something that I think I might like grow. But I'm very excited that they get to travel for a year in the US with other pieces.
I'm excited because it gets to travel all the way to Los Angeles, so I get to see the show again, which will be fun. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So this is the first time that you've done these dice, is that correct? So
yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So there's lots of potential. Be interesting to see where you take it next. Yeah. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Tried some in clay too, and they're not. I feel they're textile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. So, speaking about how you think outside the box, the next images are of electronic signs that list and show samples of your weaving. So what is the backstory to these works? I think they're so fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that. It's a project that I really, really love participating in. There's a call for entry for a new artist-run center in Newfoundland called the Cloud Factory. And this happened during the pandemic. And I don't have the full backstory, but I think this was one of those like, what's an exhibit we can create that's not going to be shut down, that's outside. And they were selecting 10 poets and artists. And to me, it was just natural because I work in Photoshop a lot preparing weave files. So I'm very used to just having the drawings and recognizing the drawings. And there's always this bit, I love naming things because I like language. And I also like, looking at the name and just finding out about like historic textiles, and also like suit fabrics are just like they have so many, like they're all named, and it's so interesting. So I did like a bunch of research, and I either ended up picking them because the pattern was interesting, or the name of the object was fun, or the name of the actual weave structure. Like I put oatmeal crepe because I just figured kids who saw this would think it's kind of amusing that there's a weave called oatmeal crepe. Absolutely. So there's, I think there's 16 different weave structures. And at the end, it asks how many weaves today. And it's sort of that it becomes this game where you could either like take a little note card and go and see how many different weave structures you can identify around you, how many you can spot, who's wearing the most different weave structures, and it's just beginning to notice around. And that exhibit, the signage traveled to 10 different places in northern Newfoundland. So it was like a locally traveling exhibit during the month of, I think it was June 2021.
That's just brilliant. It's so original. So, yeah. So I guess the question I would have is, these signs are in English. Did you consider making them in French as well, or it was all in English?
Because that was going in Newfoundland, I did them in English. I have proposed it for a different type of signage in French, and it wasn't accepted. But they were looking for poetry, and I wanted to submit weave structures and using it. It was like those the yellow things that they use in stores where they slide letters. And I was wondering if we could do weave structures instead. But no, I'm very excited by weaving notation. And there's definitely lots of projects that I would want to do that just like focus on notation and showing notation. And I've thought of that, like, wouldn't it be interesting if there could be like a scan and you could walk by and it would analyze your weave structures and it would put them on the wall really, really big. I don't know
really fun.
Who wants to program this, but it would be amazing. So, and I just think it's interesting if we just like begin to notice like pattern.
Right. Yeah. Now, when I was first learning weave structure, I would stand uncomfortably close to people's clothing because I wanted to really see what the structure was. And I don't know if that happened to you or not, but it was definitely a phase.
And I've actually I've passed it on because I've done like a lot of drawings of weave structure with my children. And sometimes they notice and they know the weave structures, and they'll see someone's shirt and they can know it. And I find that really funny because it's not just me. It's like it's gone to other people around.
Right. That's great. So we're going to move on to another image. So this image is of a person wearing a face mask and holding a dish towel, it's a somewhat provocative image. And yet both the face mask and the dish towel are considered by some to be mundane. So especially the dish towel. So would you like to talk about this juxtaposition?
Yeah, to me, I love calendar tea towels. That's the first. Blankets and tea towels are like my favorite objects to weave, but it's also to take them and to really story them and take them further. And to me, it's like the calendar tea towel, how it's a memento of the year. So I weave like one per year, but it's very much like, to me, it embodies either the year or a part of the year. So that one was done during the pandemic. obviously, and it was like the reuse, the repurpose. The ties are done with the ankle loom. I couldn't feel my fingers for a few days after that. Obviously, I did it like really fast, and I was like taking it with me everywhere I went. But and the images, it was a call for masks in Quebec with a gallery that was doing a call for mask and contest. So I decided to submit them together, and they did the photos with some with a local photographer. So that wasn't from me. I submitted the mask and I was like, wow, this is absolutely amazing and not where I thought. But and my text that I submitted with that was really the part where you're in your kitchen, you want something beautiful, but you have nowhere to go. And it was also just like, as a parent being stuck, but also like of all the previous generations of people that are just, at home, but they want to be outside. And I also have I have young children. So often if I'm at the loom, or I would weave at school in my loom, my studio is outside of my home. So I'm at the loom and I'm like, there's a lot of like just repetitive throwing the shuttle. So I'm thinking of like, what am I going to make for dinner? I have about 30 minutes left to weave. I have to go home. And then I'm home and I'm at the oven. And it's also like a portal. So then I'm at the oven and I'm also thinking like, oh, I'm going to weave later. And I'm calculating in my head and I'm thinking of colors. So I find these are like two of my activities that are sort of similar. And I'm always like thinking of one and the other. And the tea towel kind of makes the link between both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. This also looks a little like, who?
Yeah, and the color, the pixelated colors, there's one where she's throwing them and it just makes like a color grid. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. It's a great photograph. So yeah, it makes me want to sit up straight. Don't mess with her, right?
All of us.
So this next piece that we're going to be looking at, we had a conversation about. It's called Weaving Bee Variations 1 with Ghost. And I remember that you explained it as being a mixture of weaving and printmaking in some way. So could you elaborate on this?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I'll try to go slow because in 2019, I decided I really wanted to learn printmaking, and I tried a few tests with the tech at the university, and she was like, oh, you're a weaver, you're gonna love printmaking. And I was like, great, another craft that takes a lot of equipment. And but obviously I love printmaking, and I find a lot of like similarity with the flat bed and the flat weaving.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I went and I began to learn to print, but I really wanted to use my woven textiles as the matrix to print. And so that's sort of like, I wove a bunch of things and I went to Aramount School of Craft and did like a 1-week workshop, and I came back and then I got help here to learn to do like larger scale prints. And because, I've been doing natural dyes for years, but during the pandemic, I started making inks, and I learned about lake dyeing and then drying my lake dyes and grinding the pigments and making it into printmaking oils. So it's also linked with my practice that way. So now, since 2019, I've been like, I call it weaving for print. So then I weave, and I've really refined, and I'm still working at it, and I don't think I'll ever get bored of that. But finding weave structures that will look good once they're inked and put on a page. Sometimes it's because the paper really, I really like to emboss paper. So I get very thick paper from Papier Saint-Armand in Montreal, which is made from like leftovers from the textile fashion industry that's there. And this particular piece, so the way I ink my fabric is I ink a plate, I pass the fabric with the inked plate through the press. So then it picks up some ink, and then I take the fabric and I move it onto a clean plate. I put paper on top and I run it again. And what you get is where the textile was on the first plate, you can put paper on that and run it, and it's the ghost print. So it's like the reverse image that you're getting already on the reverse image. There's a lot of reverse images when printing. And I mean, it's a lot like weaving, because you can flip it, and with the notation, you can take it in any direction. And of course, I find that fascinating.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this piece is just the weaving itself, and then I sort of replaced the ghost image on top. So it works, but I mean, it's reversed, so it sort of doesn't work. And I mean, that's a bit how I feel when I'm like looking at bilingual text, or I'm looking at like something I'm written and I'm really not sure if the structure makes sense or not, because it's kind of blurred.
Mhm.
And then for a lot of prints that I've been making, it's really like now I've been weaving with paper yarn. So taking it even further, the like parallels between paper and weaving, and then weaving really like as text, as undoing it, as reworking text, folding it. I've tried taking the press as a translation machine, sort of figuring like, what can I extract the meaning? Really working it as a strange machine to take something out from a text. And it's very loose, but it's very, I mean, and then it can go back to my writing, and there's really like a back and forth between all of these. And I'm very lucky. I'm like my studio is footsteps away from a print shop where I'm a member here, and footsteps away from the looms, and then I can do all this within 500 meters.
That's really wonderful. Unusually, yeah, that's great. So, and there's a whole series of these, because you have a whole series on your website, right? Yeah. So I would encourage the audience to check out all the variations, because I think they're really fascinating. So one last question before we move on to what will be the last question is, what do you do? Do you do anything with the weaving itself? Do you incorporate the weaving into a piece, or do they strictly become something that you use for printing?
They sort of become, because after that they're inked and they're a bit, they're not great. But what I've been doing with them is I'm trying all types of tests with clay.
Okay.
So I've sort of like run them. I could, so I'm also like embossing clay, but I'm really not at the same place with weaving that I am with printmaking. And then clay is a lot more experimental, and I'm not sure, but I've been trying test, and also exactly to have it be like in a third way. So, either have like something where like parts the weaving, parts a print of the weaving, maybe there's some of the weaving onto clay. And again, it's like a way of seeing the weaving in every direction.
Thank you. I think that's just a fascinating series, and it makes me want to see it up close, not on a screen, because I'm sure it's really, really fantastic. So our last question before we move to questions from the audience for you is, what's next for you?
There's a lot of exciting things coming up. The first one I'll say is this summer, I will finally be going to Cieta in Lyon, France, which is the Center for the International Study of Ancient Textiles. They give a course, which is like the technical sessions, they're twice 2 weeks, and they're very, well, they're not hard to get into, but they're very full, their calendars. So right now, if you sign up, you could have a spot in 2026.
Oh my God.
I signed up in 2018, and so I've been waiting my turn, and finally I go this summer and next summer, and it's all about like a method of an analysis for ancient textiles. I think just the notation, it's gonna be like amazing, but I think it'll be even more amazing. And then I just can't wait to see the silk and the looms over there. I'm very much looking forward to that. And I also have a couple weaving residencies with TC2 looms at Praxis the following year at the Icelandic Textile Center, which to weave a project of blankets on language. And I have a couple solo exhibits that I'm working towards, which are weaving and printmaking, and then working with text also. So the one's next October. So I'm very excited. Lots of weaving, lots of printing ahead for me.
It sounds like you are launched and out there. Yeah, that's really, really exciting. So congratulations. We'll look forward to following you on all of your adventures. So
Yes,
great. Thank you.
thanks.
So I think it is time to take some questions from the audience. So let me start here. Okay, let's see. So I have a question from Kathleen. She says, in your I don't know what I do know, are your words woven or did you add these with the punch needle?
The words are woven with the jacquard loom.
Oh, okay.
And they're it's amazing because I mean, the words are probably on 3 or 4, like 3 or 4 wefts high. It's a double, I think it is a tide weave. Yeah, it's a tide weave that I did with like a peach pit or peach under pattern. But I mean, they're really just like 3 or 4 high, but yet you can read it from certain angles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then Ghislaine asks, what is the title of the piece with French and English words? Do you know what she might be?
There's a lot of pieces with French and English words.
But that we were looking at. Oh, it says Elizabeth is typing an answer. So let's see what she says. Oh, she typed in. She answered.
Because sometimes I give my titles in both languages. Sometimes they're just like they're both in the same sentence, so it's very hard for me to remember.
Right. I sometimes, because these questions are asked as we go through, I'm not quite sure which image they're referencing. So, and then Marcia says beautiful piece. Carrie says love the blocks. Carrie also asks, is there a place to see the rest of the reader board exhibit? I think she's referring to the Newfoundland.
I think on the site, they did a really great job of documenting it. It's called the Cloud Factory Artist Run Center, and it's in Newfoundland. That should, and last year they did a snow screening. So they made a big wall of snow and had a movie festival. So I look forward to seeing what other projects they're going to do too. It's very, very fun things.
So say again, just for people who might want to, it's the Cloud Factory. Okay.
Factory Artist Run Center.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh,
so
great.
Nancy asks, what makes a tea towel a calendar tea towel?
I mean, I use it really loose. I woven one once, which it was sort of, I did put a calendar, and sometimes it's just, sometimes I wrote the date of the year. Sometimes I write, or it's just something that to me embodies or refers to my year. I figured, I mean, the mask and towel is 2020. And I was like, that one does not need to be dated because we all know it refers to 2020 and all the following years. But I mean, when I made it, it was for 2020.
So I'm not quite sure I understand this question, but maybe you do. Danielle says, where could we find a dish towel calendar? Can they be purchased or?
I mean, they do exist because it was the industry, and I think it was the printing industry. And sometimes I look for them in France, but I mean, I look for them online in France, but people do print. There's like a drawing and it's a calendar and people put it up on their wall for the year. And then they use it as a tea towel following. So, I mean, you can find them on the market. I don't think that, I mean, I do use tea towels, but I'm not like weaving a production of tea towels.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I can
Thank you.
print one.
You can print one. Yeah. Contact her. Right. Absolutely.
Great idea.
Okay. So Carrie asks, I think it's the same Carrie. So thank you, Anie, for encouraging us to mentally plan projects, walking, cooking, weaving, and for me, spinning. Enjoy listening and watching this Textiles and Teas. So glad to hear you are using soils in your projects. Have you wandered into using mushrooms for color?
I've not wandered into mushrooms yet. I've been using clay to dye textiles also, and then like compost from the kitchen. And sometimes mushrooms do make absolutely beautiful colors. Like from what I've seen, it's amazing, but I'm trying to like limit things. I'm not doing a great job at limiting mediums, but so I haven't been exposed to mushrooms yet, but I'm sure at some point it'll just like, there'll be this day and I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be like, I got to learn about everything about mushrooms now. And
that time may come. One never knows. That's right.
I'm pretty sure it will.
Okay, so changing the topic entirely, and I'm sure this is the piece the printed piece. What is the size of this print?
That one is 30 inches by 40 inches. So it's pretty big. Not
big.
all presses, that's a bigger press. Standard printmaking paper is 22 by 30. And I mean, sometimes it's really hard to manipulate on a wet piece of paper with an apron full of ink on your own.
I bet it is. Yeah. Okay, so another question, Michaela asks, when you are using paper to weave, are you using it for both? Are you using it for both warp and weft or just weft?
I've used it for warp, but just in like on small tapestry looms, because I also have a small collection of these, either laser printed and a couple of hoket ones, which are quite nice. And right now I have a warp, which is not paper, but I've purchased a bunch of yarns that contain paper, and I think some of them would be suitable for a warp of reasonable length. But I've mostly been using it in the weft. And when I use the jacquard looms here, I mean, they're already threaded with cotton, so I just bring my wefts and sample on that. And I mean, that is also an advantage because there's already a warp.
Right.
And
right.
yeah.
That can be very nice. Yeah, absolutely. So do you have favorite sources for paper yarn? Because I know it's a specialty fiber, so or specialty yarn.
It is. I was recommended from there's a twist festival in Quebec, and a friend it's called Twist Festival, and it happens in Quebec. It's a yarn festival in the fall, and there's Atelier Perluette in Montreal, and I bought I think 5 different yarns that contain paper, and then I've ordered some from Habu Textiles, and I had some from, I think it was called the Silk Weaving Studio, some hemp ribbon yarn also. But whenever I find some with paper, and I haven't like cut out my own paper yet, maybe that's coming too. Maybe,
you never know. So yeah, it's just a very interesting to work with because it's flat as opposed to rounded. So yeah. Okay, so
yeah, and paper cuts when doing bobbins, I was quite surprised. I got a few of those.
Ouch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Karen asked, your pieces tend to be more three-dimensional, but if they are flat, have you framed them? And if so, how have you framed them, and what do you prefer for framing?
I have not framed, well, I've stretched onto stretchers a textile piece before. But I think I really like 3D, and that's just like coming from mathematics, and it's all like the one dimension is the thread, and then like the weaving is flat and it's a 2D plane, and then taking it into 3D. And sometimes just like I don't cut my yarns because they're like a measure of what fits on a bobbin, a unit of time, and also I find they take the plane into 3D. They really just like take up space and bring it elsewhere. And then so I learned all about framing when I started making prints, and we have a wonderful framer in Quebec City, which is François Simon Encadreur, which is just beautiful work. So I think if I wanted something framed, I would just go to the expert and get information. I've been dyeing wood with natural dyes. been trying that since this fall, hopefully to have some on frames with prints that are done with natural pigments too.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, thank you. So I think we have time for one more question, and Christine asks, can you speak a bit about how you incorporate your research into your new work? For example, research of historical textiles like you'll be doing in France.
I don't know how exactly at that point what I'll be doing in France. I think like I've been waiting for this for so long that I'm just gonna go and just live there fully while I'm there. And I think the course runs for like 13 days straight, or there's no break, and it's like 9 to 6 every day, and there's homework. So I think I'll be like digesting it afterwards. Definitely, like for a long time, even like in the label, I've included the weave structure. So I'd weave a blanket, but I would do the label on the jacquard loom and have the weave structure just so people can either reproduce it or know. I've shown 3D work, but there was like a piece that went with it, and it was like the notation and the shuttle pads. So the notation is always really important, and I think I just want to work more on showing the notation itself. But I'm not going in with like something specific. I just know that I like love notation, and I'm glad that there was this delay because I was supposed to leave in March 2020. So, you know, the more, even if like 3 years have passed, well, there are 3 years which like I've done more weaving and discovered more things, and then just gotten even more interested in the loss of time. So
great, thank you. I mean, it sounds like it'll be a great experience, and you just go, and it is what it is, right? Yeah,
I know it'll be amazing.
It went by really quickly. Thank you so much for being on Textiles and Tea, Anie. It was just a pleasure having you. And I would like to share with the audience that you can learn more about Anie at anietoole.com. And I also want to thank our sponsor. A special thank you to our sponsor, Myrna Lindstrom. And if you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, you can learn more at weavespindie.org. Textiles and Tea is supported by generous donations to the Fiber Trust. And next week, this is kind of amazing, HGA will present its 100th episode. So in honor of this achievement, we are asking you to help us celebrate with a $100 donation in honor of our 100th episode. So give a gift by calling 678-730-0010 or online at weavespindie.org. So if you missed part of this episode or would like to watch it again or share it with a friend, Textiles and Tea is recorded and can be viewed on HGA's Facebook page. So please join Kathy next week when she shares tea with, this is pretty awesome, with Sheila Hicks. So thank you. And I'll be watching next week. Bye-bye.